Hello everyone, my name is Daphne St. Clair Ferguson and I am so excited to be back here after one whole year. Yes, it has been one whole year since conducting my interviews at the Toronto Fringe 2024 and a lot has happened. And it's that time of year again to ask the question, what the heck is Canadian theatre? I'll be sharing some of last year's interviews with what I learned, and then also some of my thoughts, exciting, as we gear up to the 2025 Toronto Fringe happening this July 2nd to 13th. So what did I learn? You know, some people had no inkling as to what Canadian theatre was.
I don't know, Daphne, but it's something too large, you can't pin it down.
Others told me it was simply
theater that happens in Canada.
and others would just tell me the name of a Canadian show they saw.
Come from away.
And mind you, they aren't wrong. That is Canadian theatre. But was that the root of what Canadian theatre was? I found that I needed to dig a little deeper. And what I found was quite interesting. Community. Everyone was talking about the community of Canadian theatre. But isn't that what theatre has always been? Community. What made Canadian theatre's community different?
Okay, honestly, I think the heart of the piece is like everybody working on it. Like this very specific group of people working on this project are just like the most lovely, magical, kind, talented, smart group of people I've ever worked with. Yeah. It's so like magical to sit in a room with only Latin people. And I like get emotional all the time. When we were in rehearsal, I would get so emotional. That's the heart of the piece, is just working with amazing people who allow you to feel seen. And you will feel that as an audience member, I think. You'll feel like you're being let into our little family, our little home. Yeah.
I would say even like our crew that isn't Latin necessarily, I just feel like everybody was very passionate about working on this, because I always say this, but I've gotten emails sometimes when I've like done a call for something and they're like, I just need experience, and I'm like, why would that be the answer? I feel like everyone who applied for this and wanted to work on it was very like, I need to work on this, I love it. Same with like cast and everyone, so I just like feel like you're right, that is the heart of the piece.
So I am just recently Canadian. I just got my permanent residency in December.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's been hell, but it's been so great to be part of this amazing community. It's been great to just have the opportunity to produce Canadian content, even though I'm Brazilian. So now it's Canadian and Brazilian at the same time.
Yeah, I think a big thing with Fresh Palette Theatre Company, which is the company that Judah started, is really to push for emerging artists. Our cast are all recent graduates of various schools. Our set is made up of paintings done by local artists who are all like either still in school or just freshly out. And even ourselves, like we're very emerging. And we talked about the cultish theater community before. Like you see those same faces again and again. But I think the simplest way that we're trying to push the bounds here is to bring in different voices and to see new people coming in and what they can do and giving them those opportunities. I think that's a really big thing.
Yes, it is a very big thing. Also, the reason it's called Fresh Palette in the first place is a personal belief of mine that, like, everybody, whoever you are a unique individual. You have experiences that make you yourself. Those are your paints. That's your palette. Everybody has that, and they should be allowed to be able to bring that forward and then make something from it. And if you take what you're coming from and use that, then we can push the boundaries of what theater is, because there's many people in the city coming from all kinds of backgrounds who have their own stories that people have never heard before, or people heard but not in this context, and that allows us all to connect to each other and to better understand each other and to move forward together hand in hand.
Either they found their community at the Fringe or they're bringing their own community to the Fringe. It was all quite exciting. what I am curious about is, how did they end up there? You know, was it circumstance? Was it luck? It is a lottery, so how could everyone know everyone in a lottery situation? In my readings, I did discover that Canada is a cultural mosaic of sorts, or at least that's how some people define Canada. Yeah, but what the heck does that even mean? I know, you look at a mosaic from far away and it's a beautiful big picture, but when you get up real close, there are all these little pieces of glass separated by cement or some other weird grainy substance like glue. Lines. Are you supposed to break the lines? Do you cross over? Can you blend glass? Is that even possible? I don't know. I'm not an artist. So these are all questions that I still have. Maybe someone will answer that for me this year. And even though I am still trying to grapple with what Canadian theater is, I don't think I'm that far behind on learning. I met a couple artistic directors and they did not want to be interviewed, let me tell you. And I don't know if it was just because they were a little camera shy or they just didn't know what Canadian theater was. But I did find it quite interesting because in my research, I'm looking and I'm going on these big company websites, and they've got, we're a company that values Canadian theater. We program Canadian theater. Application questions. What is Canadian theater? And they themselves couldn't or didn't want to define it, which I found very interesting. But the folks in the indie scene are more willing to define it, or at least creating what they would like to define it as.
But I find like Canadian theater, there's like something, like a sense of being unafraid to tackle topics that are a little challenging, both for like the writer and the artist to put on, and also the audiences to take in. And I think there's like a willingness for audiences to like be open to whatever it is that is being thrown at them. So that's sort of what I think about when I think about Canadian theater, and what I see when I go to shows during the year and at the Fringe. I'm always even more open when it comes to Fringe to see what's out there. And I've been so pleasantly surprised and delighted by the topics people are writing about. And I think with our show, we touch on a lot of topics in the Bluffs. We talk about grief in a lot of different ways, about complicated relationships with your family, with your lovers, with your found family. So that's something that I think is really messy and something that we touch on quite a bit in the Bluffs. So I think I know for sure there was a sense of courage and bravery that came into the writing of the piece from our playwright Sarni, and just putting it on. We've had to ask a lot of our actors to be a little scared and try new things and get out of their comfort zone. So I definitely think the Bluffs folds in really beautifully to what I think Canadian theater is.
And so I think understanding, colonization, I think is something that a lot of Canadian theater is trying to wrestle with. Because Canada is a colonized place. And so I think, for me, Canadian theater is truly representing the multiculturalism and diversity that Canada likes to stereotype itself as, but actually putting that into theater practice. I don't know other people, and I can only speak to my experiences, but I think something that I'm really interested in is not necessarily just sticking to like not white theater, but just like, I don't even know if that exists, but just like theater that is within my own community.
They are creating Canadian theater, which I found very inspiring. Very inspiring. Everyone in Canadian theater is desperate for funding. Most people are using found spaces, are working with friends to avoid paying them and, spending that money on other production fees. And their fundraisers are filled with audiences of their own friends. That is Canadian theatre. Community is funding Canadian theatre, not the government. And so I have to ask, is it really the government? I mean, are grants that hard to get, or are they just hard to write? Are Canadians illiterate, or does the government just not have enough money to go around? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. That is part of what defines Canadian theatre. And I'm going to have to agree with Margaret Atwood here on this one. Canadian theatre, you know, it's survival. The price to even just perform at the Toronto Fringe is astronomical. Let's roll the numbers. And that doesn't even take into account the set pieces, labor costs, rehearsal spaces. I mean, hell, you want to pay a stage manager? Good luck. Good luck.
And he hired me originally just as the stage manager, and then he promoted me to being the writer, and then we realized that we needed an actual director, so then I became the director about a week before the tech rehearsal and directed the entire show in a week. Basically, we called me basically our theater Swiss Army knife because I did basically anything that the show needed.
The list goes on. And yet artists still decide to tough it out despite this. Surviving. It's survival. I believe this is also why artists must rely on their communities for support, for funding.
There's something magical about having like no money.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm American, and everyone's like, "Oh, there's so much money, blah, 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 whatever." But I think not having money means everyone has a lot of heart, because it's like not. I don't think anyone's like, let me produce this big, blah, 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 whatever. It's just like, I'm going to suffer for months to do this. So I think there's a lot of love in everything everyone does that I think you feel a lot in Fringe, especially like interacting with a lot of people like our age and just like doing things. And I'm like, yeah, everyone's very passionate about what they do.
Pack mentality. That is Canadian theatre. We are more likely to survive in a pack. Speaking of persistent survival, and the Red-Nosed Clown, a featured member of the Toronto indie scene. So how is it that 2 months without red noses were so successful?
I think at the forefront of our process and like being in the landscape of Canadian theater, we want more risk. We want more like women-led chaos. We want more clown that isn't ruled by people with red noses pretending to be children. We want weird, and we are obsessed.
And as people who still love a good, well-made play, we are excited about theater celebrating the fact that because it's live, there's constant possibility for failure. Yep. And we're just wondering how far you can take that failure before you get kicked out of a festival. So that's every performance is an exploration of how badly we can mess up. That's the end of my thought.
When I initially started my journey, I didn't even think that there were other types of clowns. Seriously, I know. But I learned. In my research, I came across this very popular children's TV show, The Big Comfy Couch. I don't know if any of you folks on the other end have heard of it, but, you know, it's this ragdoll-like clown, and she does this 10-second tidy, which I just think is crazy because nobody can clean anything in 10 seconds, so I just thought all clowns were liars. I wrote them off. That was until I met these 2 monks. They enlightened my whole perspective on what a clown could be. A clown doesn't need a red nose. Is this really the end goal? Canada? You know, it's hard to say, right? Some folks are satisfied with the work they're doing, you know. They're happy to do work wherever as long as they get to do what they love. But is that sufficient? Is Canada sufficient? what are the goals of artists and how does Canada align with them, and vice versa? Does Canada align with goals of artists? Do artists align with Canada? I don't know. That's what I'd like to discover this year. There were lots of folks who spoke about just doing theater for little to no pay, just for the love of theater. But what the heck does that mean? You know, for some, I think it means that they get to be a part of a community, and in turn, they get to share their community with others. For some folks, I think it means they get to be seen, and audience members get to see that. People get to see their identities reflected on stage, and I really do think that's something quite special. To live and breathe in the same room as someone you see yourself as, that's quite special. However, for other folks, I think that they do it because of the applause. No shame. I just think that's what it's for. They get to feel like they're doing something, moving something forward. But really, do you think we've moved forward that much? Truly. Often I feel as though the things said in the theater are within an echo chamber, within their own piece of glass, surrounded by cement or whatever the heck you want to call it, lines. And listen, I think theater can change minds. But how do we expand Canadian theater beyond the indie scene, beyond Canada? I mean, we all know what British theater is. Do the Brits know what Canadian theater is? That's what I'm trying to find out this year. Why Canada? Is the end goal Canada? What are you trying to accomplish with your piece in Canada? And what do you want to do with your life? Seriously. So, after all this, what the heck is Canadian theater?
Get a bunch of your fun employed friends and hustle at something for 3 weeks, and you put it in front of your parents who are disappointed.
What is Canadian theater? Well, I would say Canadian theater is a ton of fun. I think it's super silly and it's community based, and it's whatever you make it out to be, kids.
If I had an answer, I think I would be a lot more employed. Canadian theater is growing and being established, and I think it is the future, and that is very exciting. And I think it starts at places just like Toronto Fringe.
Theater that happens in Canada?
I think historically it's rooted in a lot of comedy, which I think is interesting. It's more intimate in scale, and I think Canada does have a distinct voice that is gradually building, which I think is really cool. Yeah.
It is.
Canadian theater is like theater that happens here, and it usually happens for about 2 weeks, and you know everyone who's in it, or the person who brought you to the show knows everyone who's in it.
Canadian theater is all about like different stories, and like
we're such a cool community of people from all over with different life experiences that we like flourish in. So it's always fun to like see life that as we know it through the eyes of somebody with different lived experiences, be it rats or monks or a guy standing at a music stand reading something that he's working on.
It's a lot.
It is, you know, lovely and a little chilly, but really nice, but then sometimes a little fucked up.
This is a really complex thing to get into right now, and honestly, I'm waiting in line for a beer, and some would say that's Canadian theater, right? Other people would say Canadian theater's on a stage. Other people would say it's on the street every day. You know, you're gonna go somewhere, you're gonna find a community, and you're gonna make something happen. And so, realistically, I'm going to link this back to someone named Margaret Atwood. So Margaret Atwood once wrote a series of essays, or maybe one really long essay about survival, how Canadian literature and everything is like rooted in survival. So I think that is Canadian theater. I think Margaret Atwood actually hit the nail on the head there. And if you're making art about surviving, or if you are surviving, you're making art. It's a tandem creature, and you can't separate it. So
it's whatever you want it to be. It's everything. It's nothing.
That's a really good question. It is when you read lines on a stage in Canada. Fun and funny.
Canadian theater is bizarre and whimsical, but also truthful and real.
A?
You know, if I've learned anything, it is that I know nothing. This is Daphne St. Clair Ferguson, signing off. See you at the Fringe.